Hi, everyone. Happy Monday. It's Eileen Minogue. I'm the executive director for the book Fairies. Welcome to our Facebook Live. I want to remind everyone that if you haven't had a chance to sign up for our trivia night, which is taking place this Wednesday at 7 p.m., please do so. It is free for anyone who has already donated to our readathon. If you haven't donated, you can still sign up for the trivia night, and just by making a donation of any amount. It is going to be fun. The last one was great. It was Disney themed, and the winner won $100. There was actually a tie, so two people won $100. But this one is about book series, so test your book knowledge, and hopefully you will join us. The link will be on our Facebook page. Today, I have the privilege of introducing you to Todd, and his rescue dog, Cooper. Fallout is Todd's 100th novel for young people. His award-winning YA novels include The Accident, The Wave, Give a Boy a Gun, Boot Camp, and If I Grow Up. His books have been translated into nearly 20 languages, and several have been adapted into feature films. He has also written for television, newspapers like the New York Times, and magazines like the New Yorker, and Esquire as well. His books for preteens and middle schoolers include 17-book Help, I'm Trapped in series, Help, I'm Trapped in My Teacher's Body, love it. The kids book series, The Kids Book of Gross Facts and FEATS, another good one. Don't Get Caught series, Don't Get Caught in the Girls' Locker Room, and many other funny books. Please help me welcome Todd and Cooper, and welcome.
Thank you, Eileen. Thank you very much for having me today. Cooper has decided to go have lunch, which her timing is perfect, so we don't have to worry about her for the moment.
Okay.
Yeah, so I guess I'm here to read a little bit of this book, Fallout. First, should I tell everybody a little bit of background on it?
Absolutely. Tell them a little bit about that, and then you can read. I'm going to stop sharing my video and mute myself so that everybody can pay attention to you, because that's who they're here to see.
Oh, okay, great. Thanks. Thanks. So Fallout is about the Cold War. For most of my life, I've written novels about things that are happening at the current time, and sometimes I would speculate about the future. But as I grew older, I started to look into my past for ideas for books, and immediately this story came to mind. The Cold War, of course, was this it wasn't really a war. That's why they called it a Cold War and not a hot war, because there were no guns fired. But it was this war of tactics and propaganda between the United States and Russia. They were communists, we were democratic, we had a really handsome president named John F. Kennedy. They had a leader, Nikita Khrushchev, who clearly needed orthodontia. So we were definitely in the right. There was no doubt about it. Anyway, it was a very frightening time because the Cold War was about nuclear weapons. And it was about the arms race. And if we could blow up Russia 3 times with all our missiles, then Russia had to be able to blow us up 4 times. And during this time, something that people were told to do, not many people did, but they were told to build fallout shelters. And a fallout shelter was a place a family could go to protect themselves in case of a nuclear war. And among the families that built fallout shelters were my parents. So I was the one kid on the block, in fact, in the whole neighborhood, who had a fallout shelter, which is part of the reason the book is called Fallout. And if you look really carefully, you see there's a house and then there's a ladder going underground, because many fallout shelters were underground. So anyway, I thought I'd read to you a little bit about this story. It started as a memoir about a boy, namely myself, who was very worried about nuclear wars and what to do if there was one, and whether they could make it home from school in time to get into the fallout shelter. But there was no war. And so I decided I'd have to change a little bit of the story. It's mostly about me, but there's also an alternative history in which there really is a war. So here is the first chapter of Fallout. I wake to a hand on my shoulder. Dad's voice is urgent. Get up, Scott. The light in the bedroom is on, and I squint up into his face. Dad's eyes are wide, and he's shaking me hard, not gently, the way he does when he wants to wake me up. Up now! I rub my eyes. An inner clock tells me it's the middle of the night. My heart starts to race. What? We're being attacked. He swivels to my little brother Sparky's bed. Edward! Attacked? As my brain claws towards alertness, I hear sirens wailing in the distance, not the melodic bursts of code directing volunteer firemen to a fire. These are shrill, swooping wails. Sparky groans and tries to roll over. Instead of arguing, Dad scoops him up, blankets and all. Put me down! Still half asleep. Sparky kicks as Dad cradles him and turns to me. Come on! Barefoot, heart heaving with panic, I race after him out onto the cold hall tiles, where we nearly crash into Mom, who's carrying an armful of things she's just gotten from the kitchen. Hurry! Dad barks, and we scurry down the hall. In the dark playroom, he opens the closet. With a loud clatter, sweeps away whatever toys and games lie on top of the square metal trap door. Outside, the sirens continue to blare. What's going on? Sparky cries, awake now. Mom dumps the things from the kitchen on the floor and pulls him close. It's okay, don't be scared. But now loud banging echoes down the hall from the front of the house. I gasp, what's that? Without answering, Dad yanks the metal trap door up and points down into the square of darkness. Go! I can't see a thing down there. How? Crash! Glass smashes somewhere in the house. What's happening? Sparky wails. It's okay, Mom says soothingly. Then to Dad, hurry! I feel Dad's arms pick me up and lower me into the emptiness. My feet dangle in the dark air. Frightened that he's about to let go, I dig my hands into his arms. I can't see. Feel the rungs with your feet, he commands. I feel a cold metal bar with my toes, just as footsteps slap into the playroom. It's Janet, our maid who stays over one night a week. She's pulling a light blue robe closed and her eyes are moons of terror. Get down! Dad barks at me. Richard! From somewhere in the house, a man's voice calls through the dark. The metal rungs hurt the bottoms of my bare feet as I lower myself. The dark air in the shelter is cool and damp and smells like mildew. Suddenly, boxes and bags of things shower down, bouncing off my head and arms and falling into the shadows below. I cry out in surprise, even though it doesn't really hurt. Already, Mom's feet are on the rungs just above me. Hurry! Dad yells. Ow! Sparky cries, and I wonder if Dad accidentally banged him into something as he tried to lower him through the trap door. One of my feet touches the cold concrete floor. The other steps on a box that collapses with a crunch. In there! A man shouts. Above me, Mom yells, Careful, Edward! Suddenly, there's scratching and grunting overhead. Sparky cries out and Mom gasps loudly. Something big is plummeting down and I barely have time to jump out of the way before Mom crashes to the floor with a horrible crunching thud. Sparky on her chest. Mom! A terrified cry tears through my throat. Sparky! So basically what has just happened is the family has been awakened by the father in the middle of the night and warned that there is a war, an attack from the Russians. They've sent their missiles. Now, you may have read or listened to parts where I'm talking about glass breaking and the sound of voices. Well, since we were the only people in the neighborhood with a bomb shelter, one of my great worries constantly was that if there was an attack, all the neighbors would come. And then what would we do? The bomb shelter was a little room, hardly bigger than a closet. So 4 people could just barely squeeze in there, and we had enough food and water for 4. But what happens if all the neighbors come? We couldn't say no. That would be, we'd leave them out to be blown up, by the bombs. So that was always a great worry of mine, and one that I decided to incorporate into the story, so that we do have to deal with the neighbors. And part of the mystery I'll leave you with is just how we do that. Now, it's not just a story about this terrible war. It's also about me being 12 years old and growing up in the 1950s and 60s. So interspersed among the story about the bomb shelter in the war is also the story of my life. And what the editors very cleverly did is they make the war stories, that those chapters are numeral ones, and then the stories about me just growing up as so that's how you can tell apart. They're written out. So now I'll read you a chapter about what my life was like when we weren't dealing with nuclear war. Me could eat a horse, Kimosabi, Frico Nature said in the diction of Tonto, the Lone Ranger's Indian sidekick. The Lone Ranger was a TV show. Freak of Nature's real name was Norman Freeman, but his friends called him Frico Nature because, well, that's what he was. It was the last week of 5th grade, and he, Ronnie, and I were lounging on his lawn, listening to Frico Nature's black transistor radio, which lay on the grass, broadcasting the game between the Yankees and the Cleveland Indians. Mickey Mantle, playing for the first time in a month, after a month on the disabled list, had just smashed a come-from-behind pinch-hit home run to put the Yanks ahead 9-7. Who wants to bet they still lose? Said Ronnie, who was wearing a colorful Madras short-sleeved shirt that was the current height of style. Me hungry, said Frico Nature, who sat cross-legged, all sharp, bony angles with brown hair, freckles, and thin metal wires across his upper and lower teeth from his bite plates. Lying on my back, feeling the grass tickle my neck and ears, I gazed up at the puffy white clouds in the blue sky. The June sun warmed our faces and arms. In a few days, school would end, and we would have the whole summer to play baseball and swim and have fun. On the radio, the Indians pitcher, Gary Bell, got Clete Boyer out on a ground ball, and Bobby Richardson swinging, but it didn't matter. The Mick was back, and the Yankees were winning. Want a Sara Lee cheesecake? Ronnie asked as he sucked on the stem of a clover he plucked from the lawn. He was a stocky, muscular kid with black hair greased back on the sides of his head into a ducktail, while the front hung down in a spit curl. That was the cool style. You greased back the sides, and then you had this curl coming down in the front. 1960s, early 1960s. The thought of sweet, creamy cheese filling and graham cracker crust made my stomach rumble with anticipation, even though it was only an hour before dinner time and a sure bet to ruin my appetite. I said, how? There's a million of them in Linda's garage. Ronnie might have been exaggerating, but we got the point. The houses in our neighborhood didn't have basements, so people put freezers in their garage and filled them with food. You mean steal it? I sat up and tugged nervously at the hair behind my ear. I'd never stolen anything, well, except for stuff that it was okay to steal, like cookies from the kitchen when Mom wasn't around, and our Halloween candy from the shopping bag Dad hid in his closet so Sparky and I wouldn't eat it all at once. But really, we suspected, so he could eat some of it too. It's not stealing, Ronnie insisted. We know Linda. Besides, have you ever looked in their freezer? It's so full, they'll never notice one cheesecake is missing. Linda Lewandowski had 4 brothers and sisters, so it made sense that there might be more food in the freezer than her mother could keep track of. But even if there'd been enough cheesecakes to fill all of Yankee Stadium, that still didn't make stealing right. Fico Nature gave me a uncertain look. What you think, Kimosabi? What if we get caught, I asked. Ronnie plucked another clover from the lawn and sucked on it pensively. What difference could it make? We could all be dead tomorrow. So Ronnie says that last line, we could all be dead tomorrow, because there was always that constant threat, that constant feeling in our lives of the looming danger of a nuclear war from the Russians. And to the point where some of you who are older may remember that we used to have something called duck and cover drills in school. We wouldn't just have fire drills, but we would also practice hiding under our little wooden desks, because that's what we had back then in school, in case there was a nuclear war, as if hiding under a nuclear desk would somehow save you from a nuclear bomb. I don't know. That's just the way it was. But anyway, those are the first 2 chapters in the book. And now maybe I should answer some questions or chat or whatever comes next. What was it like as a child to have a father who built the only bomb shelter in his town? Well, it gave me a lot of things to worry about. I don't think that my father really thought about what effect this would have. You know, he built this bomb shelter because he wanted to protect his family, but he didn't realize what it was like for me. They told us that we would have about 15 minutes to get from any place we were to safety. So one day after school, I had my best friend get on his bicycle with a stopwatch, and he timed me and rode alongside me while I ran as fast as I could to see if I could get home from school in under 15 minutes so that I could survive a nuclear war. It took me 23 minutes. So I had constant worries. What would happen if I was in school and there was a war and I couldn't get home in time? What would happen if Dad was at work and it was just me and my little brother and Mom in the fallout shelter? What would happen if the neighbors came? So those were a number of the things that I worried about. And those worries were what became the basis for the book. You write a lot of realistic fiction. Do you have plans to write about COVID or parts of the pandemic? You know, early on in this situation, you know, the COVID pandemic, I did think about writing a book, but it became very evident to me very quickly that many, many, many writers had the same idea. And I've often found that if I try to write about what everybody else is writing about, that's hard, because then the publishers have all these books to choose. So I've often tried to write about ideas which are not quite so obvious. I promise you, not only will there be many pandemic novels, but there are already books about the pandemic that were written before this occurred. But imagine this. So there's a lot written about, and therefore I decided probably not to go in that direction. Do you find it easier to write as an author, the fun, lighthearted books, or the books based on real events? I go back and forth. Fun, lighthearted books are fun, but they're also hard. Being funny is hard. You'd think it was easy, but it's actually a bit of a challenge. And I find I go back and forth. If I've written several really serious novels about, you know, difficult issues like nuclear war, or In the Wave about Nazism and being an independent thinker, then I want to relax and write some funny books. And then after I've written a bunch of funny books, I feel like, well, maybe I should write something more serious. So I kind of go back and forth. you are able to write books that really appeal to reluctant readers, especially teens. Why is it important for you to write books specifically that appeal to this type of audience? Well, I myself was a reluctant reader. And in fact, I got to the end of third grade and my reading was so poor that my parents were called to school by the principal, and they went to school to speak to her, and she informed my parents that I was not going into fourth grade. I could not read well enough to handle the fourth grade material, and therefore I was going to have to do third grade over again. Now, it was the end of third grade, so the summer was coming, and my mom said, well, wait, can't we send Todd to a reading tutor? There weren't a lot of reading tutors back in that day, but my mom, somehow she knew, and the principal said, yeah, you can send Todd to a reading tutor, but that doesn't mean Todd's going in fourth grade. That means we'll wait till the beginning of fourth grade in the fall, and we'll test him and see if he can handle the material. So the summer between third and fourth grade, I had to go to this reading tutor. And I think the reason I had trouble is that I'm kind of dyslexic. And of course, back then, they didn't know from dyslexia that you were just an underachiever, you know. So anyway, I went to this reading tutor, and I will say that she did two absolutely brilliant things. The first thing she did is she found out the stuff I loved to eat that I wasn't allowed to have at home. My parents just happened to be those really strict parents. We weren't allowed to have any good, fun food or soda, anything like that. It just wasn't allowed in my house, even back then. So we had settled with my parents on pretzels and ginger ale. So if I read to her, she would give me pretzels and ginger ale. And the next thing she did is she found out that I loved anything that had to do with animals. My house growing up was a menagerie of animals that I find or get from pet stores. I mean, it was ridiculous. And she found these books by a writer named Gerald Durrell, who was a British fellow whose job was to collect animals for British zoos. And so I would read his books about his adventures collecting animals. And one of the wonderful things that I did this past spring, my dear friend and I, we watched a show on TV called The Durrells of Corfu, which is based on Gerald Durrell's family. And if you watch this show, I think it's on Amazon Prime, but I don't think you have to pay extra for it. There is Gerald, and he's constantly collecting animals, just the way I did. Anyway, so I ate, and I read, and I ate, and I read all summer long between third and fourth grade, and by the end of the summer, I'd gained 5 pounds. But I was also reading well enough to get into fourth grade. Oh, so the answer to this is a long way of saying I write books that appeal to reluctant readers, I think, because I was a reluctant reader. It's not even something I consciously do. I just think that it's the level that I deal with. So that's why I've always written for books that reluctant readers like. The Wave deals with such an important topic. How were you chosen to write the novelization of the movie? Well, that's an excellent question. We have to go all the way back to 1980, which was 40 years ago. I had just published my first novel. It got a lot of good reviews, and I think they picked me because I was a new, young writer, and they thought, I kind of liked those sorts of serious subjects and wrote about them back then, even more so. And so I think that's why they chose me. And yeah, that book, it's amazing. Not only is it still in print in the United States, but it very quickly became a bestseller in Germany. And in fact, it is still required reading in many, many German schools. And so that has actually opened my career up to Germany. And many of my books are translated into German because of The Wave. What is my best advice for an aspiring writer? Well, number one, you must write. Now, I know that sounds pretty obvious if you're an aspiring writer, but over the course of my life, I have met so many people who were planning to write, who were going to write just as soon as, and now you can fill in the blank, just as soon as the summer comes, just as soon as they graduate, just as soon as they get a new computer, just as soon as, and they always talk about writing, but they never actually sit down and really start to write. So I would say the first thing you have to do is you have to write, because writing takes practice. When you pick up an instrument, you're not the greatest musician right offhand at the bat. You have to practice and practice and practice and practice to get good at an instrument. It is the same thing with writing. Most of the music that you play on an instrument when you're practicing, no one's ever going to hear. And most of the writing that you do when you're preparing as a writer, no one's ever going to read. But it's practice just the same. The second thing you must do is read. Why must you do a lot of reading if you want to be a writer? Well, that has to do with something called revision and rewriting, which all of your teachers have told you about. When you are revising, you are taking something you've written and trying to make it better. But wait, how do you know what better is? That is why you must read. Because once you've read, you have a sense of what good writing is. You have something to compare your writing to. If you don't read, you have no way of knowing what better writing is. So it is crucial to be in being a writer that you read too. And it's a genre-related thing. If you want to write romances, you don't have to be able to write like Shakespeare. You have to be able to read and write like romance writers. So it's not like it has to be the greatest literature ever written, but you have to know what's good in your particular area. And the third thing is, don't let people tell you you can't do it. If you have that burning desire to write, then you should write, because I, as a reluctant reader, and as somebody who had terrible spelling issues and still can hardly spell, nobody thought I could ever be a writer. I mean, my parents just rolled their eyes and said, oh, he couldn't read, he can't spell, he'll never be a writer. Well, guess what? You can learn to read, and even if you can't learn to spell, you can learn how to compensate for your lack of ability to spell, namely dictionaries and spell check. So, if you want to be an aspiring writer, if you are an aspiring writer, you want to be a writer, you've got to write a lot, you've got to read a lot, and you've got to don't let anybody tell you you can't do it. You can do it. One thing they always need more of are writers. I mean, today in this world, not just writing books, but writing for television, all sorts of writing. There's constantly an enormous amount of material that has to be written. So there's room. It's interesting how you wrote about what could have happened during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Are there other times in history that you've considered rewriting? Well, the other time that I've written about, but that I didn't really rewrite, was the summer of 1969. That's one of my most recent novels. It's really more a novel for adults and much older teenagers. But my editor said after Fallout, she said, what's another event, you know, that happened that had, you know, a country or worldwide implications? And it was 1969, the year of that things turned around in terms of the anti-Vietnam War movement. We put a man on the moon. It was the summer of Woodstock, and in fact, my novel has to do with going to Woodstock, which I went to. And not that I wore this T-shirt to Woodstock, but I probably wore a T-shirt quite like it. Yeah. So that's the other one that in history that I've thought about. Can we look forward to any new books from you in the near future? Yes, you can, a matter of fact. Coming this January is a book called The Cold War. Boy, I should have found a cover to, no, wrong book. Okay, Yeah, it's called The Good War. That's what it's called. Not the Cold War, The Good War. And it is about white supremacy and gaming, online gaming. There is an intersection there between people who do a lot of gaming and elements of white supremacy. And not that everybody who games is a white supremacist by any stretch of the imagination, but there is some crossover in that area. And so this is a book about what happened, what could happen in that situation.
Hi, Todd. Thank you so much. It's Eileen again. We're here with Todd Strasser. I found you to be so engaging, and everything that you were talking about hit home. I remember the bomb shelters. I remember in school the drills. I was a little younger, but I do remember that, and I remember how scared I was. So that really hits home, and I love the story about your teacher, and finding what makes you tick, and that's really kind of. You're actually talking about feeding your brain and feeding your belly. We actually partner with organizations that do Island Harvest, and they're handing out food, but you know what, let's hand out books at the same time, because that's a
Uh-huh.
great way to do it. So I love that as well. And I love that you have a new book coming out, and they can find that at toddstrasser.com. That's correct,
Oh yeah,
toddstrasser.com.
I haven't really, actually, I haven't really put it on my website yet, but I will. I'm still sort of promoting this. I do have a cover for uh, the 20th anniversary of Give a Boy a Gun,
Oh,
uh,
okay.
which has just come out. But yeah, I guess starting in January, I'll be promoting The Good War. You can already find it on Amazon, or at least pre-order it, or whatever
So if
Amazon
they
is
want to
doing.
know anything about you or learn more, or
Oh yeah, then toddstrasser.com.
perfect. That's perfect. Well, you actually gave hope, I think, to so many, because your story is so interesting that you can go from a reluctant reader, someone who was struggling, to a very successful author. And it's just, for me, it was a story of hope as I was listening to it. And I thank you for that, because there's so many kids that fall into that situation. So thank you again
Sure.
for being here with us. If anybody hasn't signed up for our trivia night, we hope that you will consider joining us. It's a fun time, and if you are the winner, you get a $100 Amazon gift card. So we would love to have you do that as well. Thank you again, Todd. We hope to have you back again next year, and we look forward to all the good things coming out of your way. Thank you, everyone.